Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Hope you're having a good Thursday. So I have to explain why there was no episode yesterday. Normally, I try to put one out Monday through Friday, and I went outside on my little screened-in porch to take a little break and turned on Netflix for a few minutes. Before I know it, it's 3 hours later, and Taylor and her friend were out there to do their homework. They've been looking for me everywhere, but didn't think to come out on the porch, because normally if I'm out there and I hear them, I come in. So I fed everybody, went straight back to bed in my bed, and slept for a solid 10 hours. Guess I needed it. So I do owe you guys an extra episode. I do have some more question and answers that I've gotten from my contact in prison and also some of the other women she's in with. So I'll do a little bonus episode either tomorrow or Saturday with that. And I decided I may leave podcasting to go protest medical costs and insurance because I have an MRI later today. They call me this morning and they're like, by the way, your copay is $630 to have this done, which is ridiculous. It's crazy, y'all. People have to choose between like their health and basic necessities, and that is wrong. Don't get me started on insulin and inhalers and the cost of things that keep people alive and having to choose between food and their medications. It's ridiculous. CrimeCon is coming up next month. I hope to see some of you Alibis there. Let me know if you're coming. And I'm going to do a few days at Disney with my kids before I turn 46 on the 21st of next month. And I want to spend that day in Epcot. So I'm probably going to miss the kickoff night, which I kind of hate because Creighton Waters and his band are opening up CrimeCon. But at the same time, this is the last time I'm going to have all three of my babies there before Taylor leaves us for college. Hope to see you guys down there. It's going to be a great year, I think. Music fact of the day: dirty deeds done dirt cheap. This couple from Libertyville, Illinois, sued the band AC/DC for invasion of privacy after they were bombarded with calls due to the song. Apparently, a lot of AC/DC fans in that area called the number 362-4368, which they interpreted "hey" as the number 8. That happened to be this couple's phone number, and they received hundreds of what they say were lewd, suggestive, and threatening phone calls, presumably asking for various dirty deeds at low prices. The Whites asked for $250,000 in damages, also demanding the AC/DC re-record the song. The judge ruled against them because, you know, that whole pesky First Amendment thing. There you go. Now you know. A little quick news for Lori Vallow. Staff for Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs confirms that the extradition request for Lori has been signed, sealed, and delivered back to the state of Idaho. We know she's charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Charles Vallow, her fourth husband, and the father of JJ Vallow, as well as the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux, which is her ex-nephew-in-law. They said the extradition process could take 3 to 6 months. I'm curious to see if she fights it. I've always heard she's terrified of Arizona prisons. Now, today I decided to do the Lindsey Shiver case. This is a couple of weeks old in the news, and I thought I had done a backstory on this, but I realized that I had done the backstory on a show for, I think, News Nation about this and didn't do an episode. And it's an interesting case to me. You have a very wealthy couple that's in the middle of a pretty heated divorce. And so I'm going to kind of go back and tell a summary of why we are where we are, but some body cam footage was released yesterday. Thank goodness this was foiled. So Lindsey Shiver, who is 36 years old and from Thomasville, Georgia, she was arrested along with 2 other men, one of those being her boyfriend, Terrance, in the Bahamas for allegedly hiring or talking to another man to kill her wealthy husband. The divorce was starting to get nasty between these two. But Lindsey and her lover, Terrance Bethel, who is 28, and the third man, whose name is Farron Newblod, he's 29, they were arrested in Guyana on July 21st for the murder for hire plot. They were flown to Nassau after their arrest. The plot was actually uncovered after Lindsey's boyfriend, Terrance, the man she was having an affair with that kind of started this whole divorce process, called police to report a break-in at the bar he worked at. Police were worried this was an inside job due to the fact that the generator's power was cut off and the safe was ransacked. So they took Terrance's phone to look at and found a WhatsApp conversation with Lindsey, Terrance, and Farron, where Lindsey texted, "Kill him," and also attached photos of her husband, Robert, in the text. After she was arrested, she did admit to sending these text messages. The man who she sent the text to kill him, Farron, he is a structural engineer. Interesting to note that his dad is a politician in Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas. Lindsey's estranged husband, Robert, played football for Auburn University between 2006 through 2008 as a deep snapper. The two met in 2007 at the school while taking a fitness class together. Robert was captain of the football team when they met. He briefly played for the Atlanta Falcons in 2008, but they let him go before the 2009 season started. Lindsey won the Miss Houston County pageant back in 2005. She was also a cheerleader for Auburn. She also finished second place in the National Peanut Festival pageant. They were married for 13 years before all this drama hit, and they have 3 sons together, all under the age of 12, the youngest being 4. Robert's family has a home in the Bahamas. It's kind of a family home that everybody uses now, and Robert and his family also own a private jet, which is partly owned by Robert and Lindsey. His family is said to have cut off Lindsey's access to the jet and the home after Robert found out about the affair Lindsey was having with Terrance in the Bahamas. Terrance lives in the Bahamas full-time, as does Farron. Lindsey was said to have been back and forth to and from the Bahamas to carry out this affair. The home is in Baker's Bay on a members-only golf course where celebrities like Justin Timberlake, Michael Jordan, and Tom Brady all have these huge mansions. Robert is the executive vice president of Senior Life Insurance, and he comes from money. His father was the CEO of Flower Foods for over 40 years. He left that job in 2019, and that bakery company is worth more than $5 billion. Robert filed for divorce on April 5th of this year, citing an extramarital affair that he found out Lindsey was having with Terrance. Lindsey responded to that divorce filing, saying that any extramarital relationship the defendant had was during the parties' separation and legally condoned by the husband. Robert hired a private investigator to track Lindsey there on the island. This is very common with wealthier marriages that are alleging infidelity. Probably the big reason he did this because is in Georgia, if you can prove your spouse cheated, that spouse does not get alimony, as far as I can tell, looking through Georgia family law. In one instance, Lindsey was seen with one man by the private investigator. Now, Robert went to confront that man. It turned out not to be Terrance at all. Later on, Lindsey was caught with Terrance by the private investigator at a bar in the Bahamas, as well as other locations. Robert thanked the man for taking care of his wife, and these photos will be huge in this divorce. Lindsey alleges physical and mental cruel treatment, including domestic violence. Now, here's the kicker. They were still living together in their 8,000 square foot home in Georgia. And the body cam footage comes the day Robert was leaving that home with the 3 boys to go to the Bahamas. Lindsey got all mad because she couldn't go on the private jet, so police were called. Robert is seeking primary physical custody of their 3 boys, sole use of their home, which is worth over $2.5 million, and says Lindsey is not entitled to alimony, saying that she has a marketing degree from Auburn and she's very much capable of supporting herself. In return, Lindsey, of course, is asking for primary physical custody, alimony, child support, and the sole use of the marital home. Her attorneys requested a restraining order saying that the wife feels unsafe in the marital home and has installed locks on the interior doors of the home for protection. Husband has abused the wife in the home in the children's presence on multiple occasions, not only physically, but also mentally and emotionally. Lindsey also accused Robert of hiding money and cutting her off financially, with her lawyer saying in a filing, the parties have an overall expensive lifestyle in general. Suddenly, husband is not permitting wife to use the jet or have access to funds. She also says that Robert took off for the kids one weekend and refused to return them until police got involved. Yesterday, they released some body cam video of Lindsey and her husband, Robert, the same day that Lindsey allegedly sent the text about killing her husband in this murder for hire plot, along with photos of Robert. Robert was at the family home in the Bahamas when the text was sent. They were due in court in Georgia 4 days after this text message was sent in the divorce proceedings. But on the body cam, Robert was leaving to take the kids to the Bahamas, and we see Lindsey come up telling an officer that they filed for divorce, but they still live together. And she says it's hell on earth, as you can imagine. Girlfriend, you got a marketing degree. If it's hell on earth, get a job and get out. I mean, really, what she's doing is she's wanting to have her cake and eat it too. She wants to have an affair, and she still wants the jet, the house, and everything else. She says that they woke up that morning and had travel plans to leave, and that her husband was insisting she not go. She said that he moved her out of the way and tried to unload the kids' luggage from her car. She said he told her that he owned the car and got super aggressive. Then she tells the officer that he's been physical in the past, and that's why she called police, because she's not doing that. She says they're supposed to take their kids to the Bahamas together, and she asked dispatch if there's anything they can do. You want to make the police force your husband to take you to the Bahamas. The man that's divorcing you and the man that you say is being physical towards you in the past. These cops look so awkward, y'all. The officer says, I don't know what it is you want us to do. If y'all are divorcing and going on vacation, other than telling him he needs to calm down, I don't personally recommend you travel together. Since there's an issue like this and you file for divorce, it's obviously a hostile situation. And Lindsey says, right. Then she asks if there's a way she can go without him. And then the officer says, the only thing we can tell you guys to do is to just be separate. When asked if they've been physical that day, Lindsey said no, except for him moving me out of the way of my car, like pushed me out of the way so he could start unloading it. The officer says they're going to need to talk to Robert. And as she's gone inside to get him, the three officers talk, and one asked if they've been to this residence before. One says yes, there was a homeless guy sleeping in their house and they didn't even know it. And the officer's like, what the heck? Then she says, why file for divorce and then go on vacation together? That's not something we can work out. We're going to tell you to separate. So at this point, Lindsey and Robert come out and you hear Lindsey say, you think you're above the law to Robert. The officer asks what's going on. Robert says for the last 3 weeks, maybe longer, she's had a couple's trip with her boyfriend planned to go to Key West. The officers, well, she just said you're going. And he said, I'm taking my kids to the Bahamas. Then she corrects him and says, our kids. And then Robert goes on to say, yesterday she said she was going to change her plans and get on the airplane to go with him and the kids to the Bahamas. And when we land, she would then meet up with her boyfriend. She interrupts and says elsewhere. Robert says, me and the kids are going to our house. I told her I'm not supporting that. And you're not getting on the airplane because that will mess with the kids' heads. And it's not something we're going to do. Then Robert says, I own 50% of an airplane. On paper, she owns 25% of that. He says, I'm the majority owner. The other 50% owners and I are in agreement. She isn't going to get on the airplane. So 75% says, we don't want you on the plane. She says, that doesn't mean you get aggressive, push me out of the way and start unloading my car. And he says, push you out of the way. And she says, yes. And he kind of looks at her like, really? She says, at the back of the car, he said, okay, Lindsey, I did not push you or anything. She says he just doesn't want me to go. He said, I raised the back to get my kids' suitcases. She says, with a locked car. And he says, so we can leave. The officer says, I'm going to tell you both like I told her. You filed for divorce. The best thing we can tell you to do is separate from each other. You don't need to be going on vacation together if you filed for divorce and it's obviously a hostile situation. As far as pushing and shoving, Georgia law says you put your hands on each other and that is simple assault and you could be arrested on that for family violence. You're saying he did and he's saying he didn't. And she interrupts and then he says something you can't really hear. The officer ultimately says, look, it's a he said, she said situation and we run into this all the time. He tells the officer, you can ask anyone who knows me if I'm aggressive or abusive. She says, you want me to show them the photos? Lindsey says, you want me to show them the photos? The officer says, here's what's going to happen today. I'm going to generate a report that we were out here and made contact with you both and that he physically moved you away from the car and you, Robert, said, I didn't do that. Robert says, yeah, I opened the hatch and she steps in front saying, you're not going to do that. Then she moves me out of the way. And then Lindsey pipes in and says, I did not move you, Robert, for God's sake. The officer says, we're not going to go back and forth. The plane is marital property. And Robert says, the pilot said it's too late to put her on there. The officer says that's going to be a civil issue. The officer then says, I can't tell her she can't go on vacation with you. I don't recommend you go on vacation. He says, I agree with that. And she says, it's an hour airplane with our kids. She asked for their ID and he asked the officer, since he owns the car she's driving and it's solely in his name, officer just cuts him off and says, this is marital property. And right now, Lindsey still has access to it. He says, I understand that, but can I get my kids' suitcases? She says, you can get your children's property out of it. And Lindsey says, so he can get the kids' stuff out of my car. So he begins moving their suitcases from the Cadillac into his truck. And the officer says it's marital property. I don't have any paperwork saying that he's not allowed to access the children's property. At this point, y'all, Lindsey's standing there looking salty. She does not like the fact that this officer is allowing him to remove those suitcases from the car. Lindsey said he's just not able to move me out of the way to get it. And the officer says again, it's a he said, she said. Then Lindsey says, I'm still going, Robert. You can take. And then he interrupts and says, look, the pilot says it's too late for you to get on this flight. He said he has to pick up the other owner after he drops us, so we can't be late. The officer asked Robert, what time did this all start? Lindsey says around 7 a.m. The officer asked Lindsey, so you're supposed to go to the, and then Robert interrupts and says, she's supposed to go to Key West and canceled her trip. Lindsey says, yes, I'm supposed to be going to the Bahamas this morning. He knows that. I texted the pilot. Everybody knew it. He's just being extremely difficult, which is nothing freaking new. The officer asked if she's leaving now, and she says, I have to go get my kids. The officer says, I can just recommend you separate. And Lindsey said, it's always going to be a he said, she said. The officer says, I mean, look, if you have surveillance or any kind of video footage I can look at and say, yes, he did put his hands on you, or an independent witness can verify that's non-biased, y'all need not to be around each other. She said, how do we do that with 3 kids? Woman, people do that every daggum day when they separate. Somebody gets their own place and you meet in the middle for the sake of the kids, but I got a feeling Lindsey did not want to leave that property. She asks if she can get her kid stuff out of his truck, and the officer's like, why are we doing that? Robert, at this point, walks out with the youngest, who, according to the media, is 4 years old. And Lindsey said, because he's taking my kids. Now, notice she says my kids. Earlier, she corrected him when he said my kids, and she said our kids. The officer asks, why do we need to do this? So we're going to stand here while you guys move suitcases back and forth. And Lindsey said, that's what I'm saying. That's what just happened. The officer says, you understand it's making the situation worse, and you're doing it in front of the children now. Robert says, our plans have been the same for weeks. So at this point, Robert cranks his truck up and says he's going to get the kids. And then she said, I just told the officer I was going to do that. He said that somebody called and said to come get the kids. And she says, okay, I'll go get Grayson, which I'm assuming is one of their 3. And he says, I can pick him up. And she said, I just said I'm going to get Grayson. Robert says, you heard me say the pilot said it's too late to add you. And Lindsey said, and I'm going to get Grayson. Robert says, where are you going? I need to get him so I can go to the airport. I'm trying to take all 3 boys. This is what I've had planned. I'm asking, where are you taking him? Because I need to pick him up and go straight to the airport. She gets a little flustered a bit and says, return him to you, Robert. He asks her where the kid is, and she kind of turns her back to him and walks off, and he names off someone whose house this child might be at, and she says no. So he then asks, well, what house is he at? She walks off towards the door that leads to inside the house, and then she turns around and comes back and says something that I can't understand, because at this point, his truck is cranked up, and Robert says, I can pick him up on my way out. The officer tells Robert that he's free to go and tells Lindsey he's doing what he planned to do. Lindsey looking none too happy, by the way. The officer goes to her patrol car, gets them a case number. Robert is strapping the child into the car seat by the time she walks up with a pamphlet and the case number. Lindsey thanks the officer. Robert kind of gives like a nonverbal shake of his head to the officer, and this says something, but you cannot hear what he says. He's talking low so that Lindsey can't hear. And the officer says that she has to document both sides, and she will generate a miscellaneous family violence report. The officer is done at this point, and she gives a sigh, kind of like this external when she gets back into her patrol car. So back to the alleged murder for hire plot. Investigators in the Bahamas uncovered the plot on July 16th. The 3, which is Lindsey, her boyfriend Terrance, and this third man, Farron, were all arrested on the 21st in the Bahamas. Robert was told about the plot by authorities and was left in fear for his life. He flew back to Georgia with their children shortly after being told. The filing says on July 16th, 2023 at Abaco, while being together did, with a common purpose, agree to commit an offense namely the murder of Robert Shiver. The three of them were then flown after their arrest to Nassau, where they were held at the Fox Hill prison. Is super notorious for terrible conditions, being overcrowded, and it's been the subject of a lot of protests from like Amnesty International for the conditions there at the jail. She was being held on a $100,000 cash bond. The three were seen leaving the island of Ghana to be taken to jail in Nassau. The men shared a pair of handcuffs and were seen kind of smiling, looking carefree, while Lindsey was not cuffed. They were all in street clothes, and she was smiling as well. In spite, get this, y'all, of the circumstances, Robert spoke to the prosecutors, which led them not objecting to Lindsey being released on bail, because initially they asked for no bail, but eventually she was released. Sources close to the case denied to the Daily Mail that Robert paid her bail. She can't leave the Bahamas. She is fitted with an ankle monitor and has to report 3 times a week to police in Nassau. Her next court date for this is scheduled for October 5th. The family court hearing was rescheduled to October 31st. Kind of got a feeling she won't be making it to that, but we'll see. Now, the 2 co-conspirators, one being her boyfriend Terrance and Farron, were released on $20,000 bail. They also have to report 3 times a week, and they all have a curfew. They had to surrender their passports, and the 3 of them cannot contact Robert or come within 100 feet of him. She is staying in a leased condo and must be inside her residence between 8 p.m. and 5 every day. Sources told the New York Post that Lindsey changed after making frequent trips to the Bahamas and after starting her affair with Terrance, saying, "From the outside looking in, it was all perfect, but she was bored for a long time. Lindsey was a firecracker. She lived a double life. This Georgia housewife with the lovely kids and the Bahamas bad girl. She got caught up in something really bad. It's sad." The friends suspected the affair, and towards the end, she said Lindsey did not even really try to hide it, especially after Robert filed for divorce. Lindsey's family has spoken out about her arrest. Her grandfather, whose name is Thomas Shirley, said he is sad, shocked, and disappointed after her arrest, saying it just tore us up. It's a shame, a crying shame for Robert and the kids and everyone else. I know Lindsey, or I thought I did, and I don't know what could have happened, but something happened. He said they seem to be the ideal family, and he said it's hard to believe because they're such a fine couple and a fine family. He said Robert is a good fellow and said he was very close with the couple and their kids. He never personally saw any signs of domestic violence, saying, "I never saw it. They were just a fine couple. I never knew anything different. In fact, it's a surprise to me that all this came up, and very disappointing. I don't know if she's lost her mind or what. I don't know." When Terrance's mother was asked if her son was moonlighting as a hitman, she said, "Not interested." A friend of Terrance's told the Daily Mail he comes from a good family and has a good job. "I've never known him to be involved in anything like this." Members of Farron Newblod's family said he's not a hitman, telling the New York Post, "That's a joke, man. He's not that type. Believe me. He tried to pretend like he is, but he isn't." Now, the Daily Mail says a well-placed source say more texts than the one we know about were uncovered on their devices. And I will only quote unnamed sources when mainstream media posts them. So no rumor or speculation, but if something is posted by a news outlet, I will talk about that. Terrance and Farron's attorneys say this was never a real plot, saying those young boys were not capable of doing that. Terrance talked to the Daily Mail and said that the messages were being misunderstood and overblown by police, and said everybody says things out of frustration. He said police have had both of his phones for 3 weeks. They've been through every single message. There's nothing there. None of us have anything to hide. People are taking everything at face value and defaming us. I love her. Everybody knows we are together. We are not hiding anything. She's a great mother, and I have too much respect for her and her children to want to hurt their father. The other man, Farron, told the New York Post this case isn't what it seems, and he says he's innocent. He also told the Daily Mail, "I've told you guys, I'll speak to you when my lawyers say it's okay." The news outlet tracked him down at a new smart home he just built for himself, and he said, "Once everything is revealed, you will understand why we aren't saying anything right now. There is more that is going to come out." Lindsey also broke her silence to the New York Post after making bail. They found her checking in with Nassau police. She was driving a rented Kia that she will use to travel around while she's on the island out on bond. She said it's been really tough, and she nodded yes when asked if she thought all of this had been overblown. She said, I really can't say too much right now. It's been hard, but I can't speak about it. Now I'm having issues with my car. I'll have to deal with that on top of everything else, but I really can't say anything more. I'm sorry. Thank you for being respectful. She is staying in that leased condo, and they all face 30 to 60 years in prison if they are convicted. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, especially with Farron's dad being a politician there in the Bahamas. Does that help get them all out of this? Or is this going to be kind of one of those where they make an example? I'm curious, really, why Robert would let her out on bail or agree to it. But ultimately, that was said in court by prosecutors that Robert did agree to her being out on bail. It's just going to be a good one to watch. There's a lot of money involved, a lot of spite, a lot of problems. She feels like his family is throwing around their influence to make all of this worse for her. So we're going to keep an eye on this one. It's just one of those that grabbed my attention because thank goodness nothing happened to Robert. At the same time, it's kind of like she's just this spoiled little rich girl who married into money and wants to not be with Robert, but also doesn't want to give up all the luxuries that come with being Robert's wife. Anyways, that's it for today. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.